The hospital was bustling with activity, the sound of wheels on linoleum floors mixing with the soft chatter of patients and nurses. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, glinting off the metal rails of wheelchairs and gurneys. In the midst of this organized chaos, she walked in quietly, her steps measured and calm, though her heart beat a little faster than usual. She had an appointment scheduled with one of the doctors, and she tried not to let the small, uneasy feeling in her stomach get the better of her. As she approached the reception desk, she noticed a few nurses glancing at her, their expressions polite but distant. She smiled at them, though there was a faint tension in her shoulders. Her appointment was checked in quickly, and she was given a small folder with her details. The receptionist's smile seemed forced, and she could sense the underlying whispers that often went unnoticed by the unobservant. She walked toward the waiting area, her bag swinging lightly by her side. Other patients sat around, some reading magazines, some staring at their phones. She found a chair by the window and sat down, adjusting the strap of her bag. The sunlight warmed her face as she glanced around, hoping for a smooth, uneventful visit. When her name was called, she followed the nurse down a narrow corridor to the doctor's office. The walls were adorned with health charts and motivational posters, but the atmosphere inside was sterile and tense. The doctor, a man in his 50s, looked up from his clipboard as she entered. There was a brief pause before he greeted her, a tone in his voice that carried a subtle sharpness, almost imperceptible at first. He asked her routine questions about her health, but the way he spoke made her feel small and defensive. Each word seemed to carry a judgment she hadn't asked for. When she explained her symptoms, he interrupted her with a curt wave of his hand and a comment that sounded more like disbelief than concern. She took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, answering politely and clearly, but he barely listened, dismissing her words with a quick shake of his head. Other staff entered the room briefly, exchanging hurried greetings, but even their presence did little to ease the tension. She noticed a nurse glance at her, eyes filled with unease, but the nurse quickly looked away. The doctor continued with his examination, asking questions in a tone that implied doubt about her understanding of her own body. She answered honestly, trying to remain composed, but the subtle humiliation stung. He made a remark about her lifestyle, something unnecessary and condescending, and she felt the heat rise to her cheeks. Other patients who might have been in the waiting area nearby were oblivious to this private humiliation, but she felt it deeply. She wanted to speak up, to defend herself, but the formal environment and the power imbalance made her hesitate. Throughout the examination, she focused on staying calm, remembering why she had come in the first place. Her health mattered more than his attitude. She nodded politely when necessary, answered questions thoroughly, and kept her eyes steady, refusing to let his words shake her confidence. Still, the doctor seemed determined to make her feel insignificant, each comment designed to belittle her knowledge about her own body. Minutes stretched longer than they should have, each one filled with the quiet tension of unspoken judgment. She noticed the doctor scribbling notes on his clipboard, but his eyes rarely met hers. When he finally stepped back, signaling the end of the examination, she felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. Relief that it was over, exhaustion from maintaining composure under scrutiny that was neither fair nor professional. As she gathered her belongings, the doctor gave her a final remark, a comment meant to undermine her intelligence and awareness. She smiled politely, masking her frustration, and thanked him for his time. She walked out of the office with measured steps, her head held high, though inside she felt a simmering anger. It wasn't just the words, it was the implication that she was less than simply because of who she was. She had faced prejudice before, but being humiliated in such a public professional setting left a bitter taste. She paused in the hallway, letting the tension drain slightly from her shoulders. She thought about the unfairness of it all, and how often people like her were dismissed without consideration. She reminded herself that dignity was her own, that no one had the power to strip it away unless she allowed it. Each patient deserved respect, and it was painful to witness the lack of empathy in someone who was meant to heal. A few staff members passed by, offering polite nods and smiles, but she could sense the quiet acknowledgement of what had occurred. Small gestures of recognition, though brief, reminded her that not everyone was indifferent. The hospital, though a place of healing, was also a place where prejudice could hide behind professionalism and authority. She felt the weight of this dual reality as she continued toward the exit. She reached the reception area, explaining briefly to the staff that she had completed her appointment. The receptionist, who had been watching the doctor's behavior with subtle discomfort, offered a quiet, sympathetic smile. It was a small comfort, but it mattered. As she walked out of the hospital, the sunlight hit her face again and she took a deep breath. The outside world seemed brighter, the air fresher, and for a moment, she let herself feel relief. Walking to her car, she reflected on the experience, thinking about how often these encounters happened without consequence. She knew that speaking up could be difficult, especially against someone in a position of authority. Yet she also knew that justice often started with awareness and courage. Her mind ran through possible steps, from sharing her experience with hospital administration to documenting what had happened, ensuring that this type of behavior would not be ignored. Despite the humiliation, she held her head high, refusing to let the doctor's attitude define her worth. She understood that this experience, painful as it was, also revealed her own strength. She had endured, maintained her composure, and recognized the injustice without letting it break her spirit. Each step she took away from the hospital was a statement of resilience. As she drove home, she thought about the broader implications. How many others had faced similar treatment? How often were prejudiced actions excused under the guise of professionalism? She felt a mix of determination and frustration, knowing that this incident could not simply be forgotten. It was a part of her life story now, a reminder of the need for fairness and accountability in spaces where people trusted their well-being to others. By the time she reached home, her mind had shifted from immediate frustration to planning. She would speak with her husband, who held a position of influence in the hospital, and together they could consider the appropriate steps. Her dignity remained intact, and her resolve to address injustice had only strengthened. She knew that the path ahead would require patience and careful action, but she was ready to face it. The day, though challenging, ended with her feeling empowered rather than defeated. She had confronted humiliation with grace, recognized the prejudice for what it was, and prepared herself for the necessary steps to ensure accountability. The experience, while uncomfortable, reinforced her belief in standing firm and maintaining self-respect. She knew that her story could inspire others to recognize injustice and act, and that knowledge gave her a sense of quiet satisfaction as she prepared for the days ahead. After leaving the hospital, she drove in silence for a while, the events replaying in her mind like a slow-motion scene. She felt a mix of anger, disappointment, and a strange kind of determination. The humiliation she faced lingered, but she refused to let it control her. She knew she had to process her feelings first, take a moment to understand what had happened before deciding what to do next. When she arrived home, her husband was in his study, reviewing patient charts and hospital reports. He looked up as she entered, immediately noticing the tension in her face. Without a word, he set aside his papers and gestured for her to sit. She took a deep breath, the comfort of his calm presence helping her steady herself. She began to recount the incident, carefully describing every detail. The doctor's dismissive tone, the condescending questions, the subtle sneers, and the way he undermined her knowledge about her own body. She spoke slowly, ensuring that every nuance of the humiliation was conveyed, while her husband listened intently, eyes narrowing slightly at the unfairness of it all. He asked a few clarifying questions, not out of disbelief but to understand the full scope of what happened. His professional side was already thinking about hospital protocols and accountability, but his personal side showed concern for the emotional impact on his wife. He could feel her frustration, the small wounds that weren't visible but ran deep. Once she finished, he sat back in his chair and remained silent for a moment, letting her words settle. Then he spoke, his voice calm but firm. He assured her that what happened was unacceptable, and that the doctor would not be able to dismiss her experience lightly. The authority he held as the chief medical officer was not just administrative, it was a responsibility to ensure fairness and dignity for every patient. Together, they discussed the next steps. She wanted her experience acknowledged, and he wanted to ensure that proper action was taken. He suggested gathering statements from staff who may have witnessed the incident, so there would be clear documentation. She agreed, feeling relieved that her experience would not be ignored. The following days were a mixture of routine life and subtle planning. She returned to her daily activities, but her mind remained partially occupied with the incident. Meanwhile, Her husband discreetly reached out to a few trusted staff members, carefully inquiring about what they observed in a manner that did not alert the doctor. He noted their responses, all of which corroborated the humiliating behavior she had described. During this time, she reflected on the nature of prejudice and how it could appear in professional environments, hidden behind expertise and authority. She realized that while people often assumed that medical professionals were beyond reproach, the reality was more complicated. She thought about other patients who might not have the confidence or resources to speak up, and her sense of responsibility grew. The doctor, meanwhile, went about his work as if nothing had happened. He maintained his authoritative demeanor with patients and staff, unaware that his actions had already set events in motion that could impact him. Each interaction he had was observed carefully by her husband, who kept a discreet eye on professional behavior throughout the hospital. One afternoon, she visited a nearby cafe to clear her mind. The chatter of customers and the rich aroma of coffee provided a temporary escape from the tension. She reflected on her encounter not as a victim, but as someone who had endured and had the opportunity to influence change. She felt a quiet sense of empowerment, knowing that her dignity had remained intact despite the doctor's attempts to undermine it. As the days passed, she and her husband continued their discussions, weighing the best way to address the issue without unnecessary conflict, but with firm accountability. They knew that addressing prejudice in a professional setting required both tact and transparency. They were determined to act in a way that upheld justice while maintaining the integrity of the hospital's environment. Her husband began drafting a plan to confront the doctor with evidence and witness statements. He thought about timing, wording, and protocol. The goal was not only to correct the behavior, but to prevent such incidents in the future. He wanted the doctor to understand the impact of his actions, not just to face consequences, but to learn from the experience. At home, she continued to process her emotions, sharing her reflections and fears with her husband. He reassured her repeatedly, emphasizing that her courage in speaking up was an essential part of creating change. She felt a growing sense of solidarity, realizing that they were a team, both personally and professionally, working toward a shared goal of justice and dignity. In the hospital, staff members began to notice subtle changes in interactions. Some were quietly supportive, offering small gestures of acknowledgement to her, recognizing the strength it took to endure such treatment. Others were cautiously observant, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. The environment remained professional, yet a tension hung in the air, a silent anticipation of accountability. She occasionally revisited the memory of the humiliating encounter, but she did so with clarity rather than anger. Each reflection reinforced her awareness of the need for fairness and the importance of standing against prejudice. She realized that the incident, while deeply personal, had broader implications for the hospital community. She was not alone in her experience, and the steps she and her husband were taking could help others who might face similar situations. One evening, she found herself writing down the details of her experience, capturing the emotions, the dialogue, and the subtle gestures of belittlement she had endured. This act of documentation helped her process the experience fully, transforming pain into a clear narrative that could be presented when necessary. She realized the power of recording truth not for revenge, but for accountability. As the week progressed, she and her husband scheduled a private meeting to discuss the final steps before confronting the doctor. They reviewed the collected evidence, the witness statements, and her own account, ensuring that everything was organized and precise. Their strategy was thoughtful, aimed at revealing the truth without unnecessary escalation, maintaining professionalism while highlighting the serious nature of the behavior. Finally, she felt a sense of readiness. She had endured humiliation, maintained her dignity, and now had the support and authority of her husband to address the injustice. The experience had been difficult, but it had strengthened her resolve and reinforced her belief in standing firm against prejudice. She felt a quiet confidence knowing that the next steps would be handled with care, fairness, and determination. The anticipation built as the day to confront the doctor approached. She prepared herself mentally, imagining how the conversation might unfold. She focused on staying composed, calm, and articulate, understanding that her role in this process was as vital as her husband's authority. Each thought she had reinforced her belief in justice and the importance of addressing discrimination directly and effectively. As the sun set, casting long shadows across their home, she reflected on the journey so far, from the moment she stepped into the hospital, to enduring humiliation, to carefully planning a course of action. She had remained strong and resilient. She recognized that her courage was not just for herself, but for others who might face similar challenges. The experience had shown her the importance of integrity, awareness, and the power of standing up against injustice. By the end of the evening, she felt prepared and determined. She and her husband had created a plan that was both strategic and principled. The incident, though painful, had become a catalyst for action. She knew that the confrontation with the doctor would not be easy, but she was ready to face it with dignity and resolve, confident that justice and fairness would prevail. She went to bed that night with a sense of calm determination, knowing that the next chapter would be crucial in addressing the prejudice she had endured. The days that followed were filled with quiet anticipation. The woman continued with her normal routines, but every step seemed slightly heavier as she carried the memory of the humiliating encounter. At home, she spoke often with her husband, reviewing the details of the incident and the collected witness statements. The process of recounting each moment helped her process her emotions and maintain clarity, making her more prepared for the confrontation ahead. Her husband, as the hospital's chief medical officer, worked diligently behind the scenes. He spoke with staff members discreetly, confirming the details of what had happened. Some were hesitant to come forward, worried about repercussions, but the respect they held for him encouraged honesty. They described the doctor's condescending tone, dismissive questions, and subtle attempts to belittle the patient. Each statement reinforced what she had experienced, and the CMO carefully documented everything, ensuring that the evidence was thorough and irrefutable. Meanwhile, the doctor remained oblivious to the investigation quietly taking place. He continued his work with the same authoritative air, interacting with patients and colleagues as if nothing had occurred. His confidence seemed unshakable, and he showed no sign of the accountability that was quietly approaching. In his mind, he had done nothing wrong, never realizing the consequences that awaited him. The woman spent her days reflecting on the incident and its broader implications. She thought about the subtle ways prejudice could infiltrate professional spaces, and how often patients were left feeling powerless. She understood the importance of not only addressing her own experience, but also ensuring that the behavior would be recognized and corrected to prevent it from happening to others. Her focus was on justice and systemic improvement, not revenge. At the hospital, the CMO continued gathering evidence. He examined schedules, reviewed patient records, and interviewed colleagues. Each piece of information built a clear picture of the doctor's behavior. The CMO's methodical approach was deliberate. He wanted to ensure that when the time came, the confrontation would be professional, backed by facts and impossible to dismiss. The doctor's arrogance, which once seemed untouchable, was now being met with a careful, calculated response. The woman's role in this process was equally important. She reflected on the incident's emotional impact, her own response, and what justice would look like. She prepared herself mentally for the possibility of direct interaction, imagining how she would present her account if needed. Each day, her confidence grew, strengthened by the knowledge that her experience mattered and that she was taking steps to ensure accountability. One morning, she received a call from a nurse who had witnessed the doctor's behavior. The nurse spoke quietly, offering additional details about how the doctor had humiliated her. These small accounts, which might have seemed insignificant individually, collectively painted a larger, undeniable picture. She took notes, expressing gratitude for the courage of those willing to speak up. The support of the hospital staff reinforced her sense of community and fairness, reminding her that she was not alone. Her husband, while professional and composed, showed subtle signs of frustration at the necessity of addressing such prejudice in his own institution. He knew that this confrontation could create tension, but he also understood the importance of integrity and fairness. His approach was deliberate, to correct behavior while maintaining professionalism and avoiding unnecessary conflict. He valued respect and dignity for every patient, and this incident tested that commitment. The woman continued her personal reflections. She wrote down her thoughts, capturing not only the details of the doctor's behavior, but also her feelings of indignation, resilience, and hope. Writing helped her organize her thoughts and clarify her intentions. She realized that this documentation would serve as both a personal record and a tool for presenting her experience in a structured and impactful way. At the hospital, the tension was palpable, though subtle. Staff who were aware of the situation moved carefully, balancing their daily responsibilities with the awareness that a significant confrontation was coming. Some expressed quiet support, offering words of encouragement or brief gestures of solidarity. These small acts mattered, reinforcing the woman's sense of dignity and the importance of the upcoming actions. The doctor, meanwhile, continued to operate with the same authority he always had. He remained unaware of the meticulous preparation that was occurring, confident in his own professionalism. This ignorance made him more vulnerable to the confrontation, as he had not anticipated the scrutiny that was quietly gathering around him. Each patient interaction, once routine, now became part of the documented pattern that highlighted his behavior. In the evenings, the woman and her husband reviewed the plan for addressing the issue. They discussed timing, phrasing, and strategy. Every detail mattered, from the order in which evidence would be presented to the tone used in communication. Their goal was not to humiliate or punish unnecessarily, but to ensure that the doctor understood the consequences of his actions and the importance of respectful treatment for all patients. Through this careful planning, the woman felt a growing sense of empowerment. She recognized that enduring humiliation had strengthened her ability to stand firm and act decisively. She had maintained her composure, reflected deeply, and prepared for action, turning a negative experience into a force for change. Each day reinforced her belief that dignity and justice could be restored through careful, deliberate steps. As the day for confrontation approached, the woman practiced mentally, imagining how the interaction might unfold. She considered possible reactions from the doctor, including denial, defensiveness, or surprise. She prepared responses that were calm, factual, and assertive, ensuring that her perspective would be heard clearly. This mental preparation gave her confidence, reinforcing the belief that she had the right and responsibility to stand up against prejudice. The hospital staff continued to observe the unfolding situation quietly. Some were nervous, uncertain about how the confrontation would affect workplace dynamics. Others felt relieved, hopeful that justice would be served and that such behavior would not be tolerated. The collective awareness of the hospital community added weight to the importance of the upcoming actions, emphasizing that this was not just an individual issue, but a matter of professional integrity. The woman also considered the broader implications. She knew that prejudice could appear in subtle ways, often overlooked or dismissed. By addressing this incident openly and professionally, she was not only advocating for herself, but also setting a precedent for others who might face similar challenges. Her actions could encourage awareness, accountability, and a culture of respect within the hospital. Finally, the stage was set for action. The woman and her husband had gathered all necessary information, documented every detail, and planned their approach carefully. They were ready to confront the doctor in a manner that was fair, professional, and firm. The anticipation was intense, but both felt prepared. They understood that the outcome could have a lasting impact, not only for them but for the hospital as a whole. As the day drew closer, the woman felt a mix of emotions, lingering frustration, determination, and a quiet sense of hope. She had endured humiliation with grace, prepared thoroughly for the next step, and maintained her dignity throughout. Her confidence was now paired with strategic preparation, creating a powerful combination of personal strength and professional accountability. The hospital itself seemed to hold its breath, the subtle tension among staff a reflection of the seriousness of the situation. The woman and her husband moved through the final stages of preparation with care, ensuring that the confrontation would be based on fact, clarity, and professionalism. They understood the importance of addressing prejudice directly, while maintaining the integrity of the hospital environment. By the evening, the woman felt ready. She had reflected, prepared, and built a support system of evidence and witnesses. The humiliation she had endured no longer felt like a burden, but a catalyst for action. She recognized the importance of facing the upcoming confrontation with composure, knowing that her experience mattered, and that justice was within reach. The quiet anticipation of change filled her with a sense of purpose, ready to bring accountability and dignity to the forefront. The day of confrontation arrived with a quiet intensity. The hospital was operating as usual, yet a subtle tension hung in the air. The woman and her husband, the chief medical officer, had prepared meticulously. Every detail was reviewed, every statement corroborated, and the plan for addressing the doctor's behavior was set. They understood that the confrontation needed to be professional, factual, and decisive. She arrived at the office with a calm but steady demeanor, her steps measured and purposeful. The events that had humiliated her replayed briefly in her mind, but instead of anger, she felt a focused determination. This was not just about the doctor. It was about fairness, dignity, and accountability. She knew her role was vital and she was ready. Her husband waited in his office, reviewing the final notes. The doctor was summoned under the pretense of a routine administrative meeting. He entered confidently, carrying the same air of authority he always did, unaware of the meticulous preparation waiting for him. His eyes flicked between the CMO and his wife, noticing a calm seriousness that he had not expected. The CMO began the meeting by outlining the purpose clearly. He spoke in a steady voice, emphasizing professionalism, patient care, and the importance of respect in all interactions. Then he presented the evidence. Witness statements, documented accounts, and the woman's detailed experience were shared. The doctor's expression changed subtly with each piece of evidence, the first signs of shock flickering across his face. She remained composed, recounting the incident in her own words. She described the humiliating comments, the dismissive tone, and the condescending behavior. Her voice was calm but firm, each word chosen carefully to convey the impact of his actions. She made it clear that this was not about personal revenge, but about highlighting prejudice and ensuring it would not continue. The doctor shifted in his chair, attempting to maintain authority, but the evidence was undeniable. His previous confidence faltered as he realized the extent of what had been documented. Each statement, each account, painted a clear picture of behavior that was not acceptable in a professional, caring environment. He tried to explain, to justify, but the calm clarity of the CMO and the woman left little room for deflection. The room remained silent for a moment after she finished speaking. The gravity of the situation settled in, not just on the doctor, but on everyone present. The CMO emphasized that the hospital's commitment to patient dignity and staff integrity required accountability. He outlined the consequences, which included a formal reprimand, mandatory sensitivity and diversity training, and a clear record in his professional file. The doctor could see that the system was addressing the behavior decisively, with fairness and transparency. She watched closely as he absorbed the information. His initial shock gave way to embarrassment, then reluctant acknowledgement. The reality of what he had done, and the fact that he had unknowingly humiliated the wife of the hospital's CMO, weighed heavily on him. For the first time, he saw the true impact of his words and actions, not just as a professional obligation, but as a human consequence. The CMO continued, outlining steps to prevent future incidents. Staff would receive additional training on respect, empathy, and professional conduct. Policies would be reviewed, and a culture of accountability would be reinforced. This was not about punishing one individual. It was about ensuring the hospital remained a safe and respectful environment for every patient, regardless of background. The woman listened quietly, noting the doctor's reactions and the way he acknowledged his mistakes. She felt a mix of relief and vindication, but she maintained her calm composure. This was about change, not personal victory. Her courage in speaking up, combined with her husband's authority, had created an environment where accountability could thrive. The doctor had faced a truth he could no longer ignore, and the hospital was taking steps to prevent such behavior in the future. As the meeting concluded, the doctor was given clear instructions on how to proceed. He was expected to complete the sensitivity training, review patient interaction protocols, and reflect on his conduct. The CMO emphasized that this was an opportunity for growth, to understand the importance of empathy and respect in every interaction. The woman nodded in agreement, recognizing that change was the ultimate goal. The doctor left the office with a mixture of humility and discomfort. He had been confronted with undeniable evidence, his behavior exposed in a professional, factual manner. The initial shock had passed, replaced by a realization of responsibility. He understood that the impact of his actions went beyond one patient. It affected the culture and integrity of the hospital. The woman and her husband remained in the office for a few moments, discussing the outcome and next steps. They planned follow-ups to ensure compliance and to reinforce the importance of professional conduct throughout the hospital. The sense of accomplishment was quiet but significant. Justice had been addressed, dignity had been restored, and steps had been taken to create a safer, more respectful environment for all. Throughout the day, the hospital continued its routine operations, but a subtle change was felt among the staff. The confrontation had demonstrated that prejudice would not be tolerated, that accountability was real, and that dignity was valued. Staff members who had observed the incident felt a renewed sense of confidence in the leadership and the commitment to fairness. The woman reflected on the experience, recognizing the strength it had taken to endure humiliation and then confront it constructively. She understood that standing up against prejudice required courage, clarity, and support. Her husband's role as the CMO had been instrumental, but her own composure and determination had been equally vital. Together they had navigated a difficult situation with professionalism and humanity. By the evening, the tension had eased, replaced by a sense of resolution. The doctor's behavior had been addressed, consequences had been communicated, and steps for improvement were clear. The hospital had responded with integrity, reinforcing its commitment to respect and patient dignity. The woman felt a quiet pride, knowing that her actions had contributed to meaningful change. She also recognized that this was just one step in a larger journey. Prejudice and disrespect could appear in many forms, and vigilance was necessary to maintain fairness. However, the experience had shown her that courage, preparation, and clarity could create accountability. It had shown that even in professional environments, individuals could make a difference, and that dignity could be protected through action. As the day ended, she returned home with her husband. They discussed the events, the outcomes, and the next steps for follow-up and reinforcement. Their conversation was calm and reflective, acknowledging the impact of the confrontation while focusing on constructive progress. The resolution was professional, thoughtful, and grounded in fairness. That night, she reflected on the journey from humiliation to accountability. She had faced a situation designed to undermine her confidence, yet she had maintained composure and dignity. She had worked with her husband to ensure that justice was served, that the doctor understood the impact of his actions, and that the hospital environment would be improved. The experience had been challenging, but it had reinforced her belief in fairness, integrity, and the importance of standing against prejudice. She went to bed with a sense of calm fulfillment. The confrontation had been difficult but necessary. Accountability had been established, dignity had been restored, and the hospital had taken steps to ensure a safer, more respectful environment for all patients. She knew that the future would still require awareness and vigilance, but she also knew that she had contributed to meaningful change. Her courage, composure, and determination had made a difference, and that realization brought a quiet, lasting sense of satisfaction. The days after the confrontation felt lighter for the woman. The tension that had weighed on her since the humiliating incident was slowly lifting. She could go about her routines without the constant reminder of the injustice she had endured, yet she knew that the work was not entirely over. Change takes time, and the steps she and her husband had initiated would need follow-through to ensure lasting impact. At home, she discussed with her husband how the hospital would continue to monitor staff behavior. They decided to set up a feedback system where patients could safely report disrespectful treatment, ensuring that no one else would feel powerless. She felt proud that what had started as a personal experience could evolve into a system that might help many others. It was empowering to know that her own dignity could help reinforce the dignity of others. The doctor, meanwhile, was quietly adjusting to the changes. He attended the mandatory sensitivity and diversity training sessions, and initially it was clear he was uncomfortable. The sessions required him to confront his own biases and understand the impact of his behavior. At first he resisted, but as he reflected on the confrontation and the evidence presented, he began to grasp the seriousness of his actions. The realization of how deeply his words could wound someone's confidence and sense of worth was sobering. Throughout this process, the woman maintained her calm and dignity. She understood that healing and progress were not just about punishing the wrongdoer, but creating understanding and improvement. She felt satisfaction in seeing the doctor's slow but steady transformation. Her courage had initiated a change not only in the individual, but in the hospital culture itself. The hospital staff noticed subtle changes too. Conversations among colleagues shifted slightly, with more emphasis on professional respect and mindful communication. The environment felt safer, and patients seemed to sense the difference. The woman visited the hospital occasionally, and she could feel the improved atmosphere. Staff greeted her warmly, aware of the steps taken to uphold patient dignity. It was a reminder that accountability and change could ripple through an organization. She also reflected on her own growth. The experience, though painful, had strengthened her ability to stand firm in difficult situations. She had learned the importance of documentation, preparation, and clear communication. She realized that dignity is maintained not by avoiding conflict, but by addressing it with clarity, respect, and courage. These lessons stayed with her, preparing her for future challenges in both personal and professional settings. As the weeks passed, the hospital implemented additional initiatives. Staff training became more regular, focusing on empathy, communication, and diversity. Policies were updated, and the leadership team emphasized the importance of treating every patient with respect and compassion. The woman and her husband contributed their insights, helping to create a system where accountability was expected and respected. The doctor, now more aware of his impact, began to approach patients differently. He listened more attentively, asked questions without judgment, and checked in with colleagues to ensure his tone and manner were professional. His interactions were not perfect, but the change was noticeable. It was a reminder that accountability and reflection could lead to genuine improvement. For the woman, the satisfaction came not just from the doctor's change, but from the sense that the hospital environment itself was evolving. The incident had sparked a conversation and a set of actions that made the workplace more aware, more respectful, and more human-centered. Patients who might have otherwise remained silent now had a voice, and staff were reminded of the importance of empathy in every interaction. She also took time to share her experience with close friends and family, emphasizing the importance of standing up for oneself in the face of prejudice. Her story became an example of how dignity, preparation, and calm assertiveness could lead to meaningful change. She did not speak to incite anger, but to inspire awareness and courage in others who might face similar situations. As months went by, she saw the lasting impact of the incident. The hospital's culture slowly shifted, emphasizing respect and accountability. Staff became more mindful and patients felt safer expressing their concerns. The doctor continued to improve, understanding that his authority came with responsibility and that every interaction mattered. The woman recognized that the journey from humiliation to empowerment was not just personal, it was communal, affecting an entire environment. At home, she and her husband reflected on the lessons learned. They acknowledged that facing prejudice